Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning and welcome to our session today on Restore Our Earth 2021. My name is Anita Rehome and I currently serve as the financial literacy coach for St. Philip's College. So before the session begins, I want to just talk about Zoom etiquette. This session will be recorded. If you experience any connectivity issues, please re-enter the session utilizing the same link that you used entering the session. Please ensure that your audio is muted throughout the session. And then basically our session is going to include introductions of a roundtable panelist, a sustainability organization, ideas of process on restoring our earth, and then followed with closing song and Q&A. And it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Paul Martin.
Okay, I'm just going to start with a little song I'd hoped Deborah Burton would sing, but Deborah Bolton, that is, Dr. Deborah Bolton. However, she had a family illness and couldn't make it. I wonder if the world can wait that long. I don't doubt for a minute someday we'll all learn to start living together. We'll fix all our mistakes, even if it takes us forever. And someday we'll quit fighting and we'll get right to righting all these wrongs. Someday we will, but I wonder if the world can wait that long. And we'll quit building buildings anywhere we can fit a building and let some green grass grow. We'll save a little green, a place for birds to sing and the wind to blow. Someday we'll all stop and realize what we've got before it's gone. Someday we will, but I wonder if the world can wait that long. Someday before it's too late, we may let the light come on. Someday we'll all stop and realize what we've got before it's gone. Someday we will, but I wonder if the world can wait that long. Someday we will, but I wonder if the world can wait that long. That was written recently by Adam Wright, and Cody Canada of Cross Canadian Ragweed has been hearing him on 92.1 station in New Braunfels, Texas, quite a bit. I like the song. Okay, so Anita, I guess we'll go right on into the introductions. Of course, I'm Paul Martin, and I'll do a little more as far as myself here in a second. I'll go ahead and start with Professor Kathy White. Is Kathy on with us? She was the woman that called me, the colleague that called me about doing this. So I hope she comes on relatively soon. But we taught together for a number of years there at St. Philip's in the Natural Science Department. And she is also involved in community gardens in the St. Philip's area. Now, you panelists, when I introduce you, just kind of flick your finger up so folks, they see your name there, so they'll see you. The esteemed Roland Ruiz is the general manager of the Edwards Aquifer Authority. He's former director of community and public relations with St. Philip's College, and he had 21 years as Medina Valley Independent School District trustee. I'm going to go ahead and say that Deborah Bolton, who I really wanted to be with us today, and she may interact with us in some other kind of way in the future, because I'm starting to think that I need to get more involved again with St. Philip's College. But she's Director of Intercultural Learning and Academic Success at Kansas State University. She used to be the co-host of High Plains Public Radio show Silver Rails, and in 2019 she was the Kansas Geography Teacher of the Year. She's her indigenous roots is Ute, and I really wanted her to be on. Rosina Conchuala. Rosina, you want to hold up your hand there? She is with the Clean Energy Leadership Institute and is an executive director of Ecologic. She was a Fulbright scholar. I thought she was still in Washington, D.C., but she tells me that she's now in Chicago. Tom Giesel is a wheat and grain farmer in the Larned, Kansas area. He was vice president of Kansas Farmers Union. He's an amateur historian for the Farmers Union, and he was on the board of Ogallala Commons. That's when I met him. Katie Trish is grants coordinator of the Small Producer Initiatives at Texas State University. Of course, that's Lyndon B. Johnson's old school and where my wife went to college. She's pursuing a master's in agriculture, and she has a lot of very much experience on the land with organic farming. Pete Silvius is director of Whole Child Initiatives with the Seguin Independent School District. He's an outdoor educator, and actually he's a neighbor down the street. Sharon A. Bird, Sharon A., raise your hand. She's a graduate of St. Philip's. She was former president of Environmental Law Student Club and is prepping for her bar exam. By the way, she went to St. Mary's University. My wife, Betsy, if she would put her head in here.
Happy Earth Day, everybody.
She was a ecology educator at St. Seguin High for 20 years. And she actually hails from Rollins community, Castroville, Texas. And then finally, John Martin is the director of student, I abbreviated this, but conduct. The director of student conduct at St. Philip's College. And he's going to tell us just a little bit about the history of St. Philip's College. So I'm going to turn it over to John Martin.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Dr. Martin. It's a pleasure being here with you guys this morning. So St. Philip's College was founded in 1898 as a sewing school for newly emancipated African American people. It was founded by the Episcopal Church of the West Diocese of Texas, and the school had its humble beginnings at that point. And throughout the history of the college has educated, marginalized people. It's part of our mission to build on that legacy. We are considered a historically Black college as a result of being founded to educate the newly emancipated people. And since then, we've become recognized as a Hispanic serving institution, which means that we graduate a large number of Hispanic students as part of our student class. St. Philip's College has a storied history in San Antonio as being an institution to serve as a beacon of hope and life for families in our community. We have grown from our humble beginnings to be a 13,000 student population, educating students in both arts and sciences as well as applied sciences, the industrial trades, and creating opportunities for students to change the trajectory of their family's future by getting their education and developing skills to help benefit them both financially and professionally. We are very proud of the relationship that we've had in San Antonio with the community and with our corporate partners to provide a place for students to learn and grow. And in honor of today's Earth Day, we also celebrate the engagement of students in that process. As Dr. Martin introduced Sharon A. Bird, she was a very actively involved student when she was here at St. Philip's College. I've known her over the years, and we provide a space for students to be engaged and grow through their college experience. And one of those things has been through working in organizations like our Eureka Science Club, putting on Earth Day activities in the past. I know they've planted trees and so forth. So St. Philip's College has a long history and a proud history in our San Antonio community, and we're glad to be a part of today's conversation.
Thank you, John. We really appreciate that. I was always proud. It was a wonderful place to work, and I'll continue to work with St. Philip's. I'm not gonna. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, Anita. Uh, I'm not gonna say much about myself. You can read this, but I do want to say that this business of restoring the earth, um, protecting what we have, it's serious business for me. It really is, in terms of really having quality of life for all, including other species, and for as long as possible. But on the other hand, I also want to say, and I don't want to make it sound kind of flippant, but on the other hand, life goes on or not. Uh, my mom is only going to be with us for a few more days, but life goes on. And I do sleep well. I'm sorry, but I sleep well every night. But we got to fight to do a better job of what we've been doing. Uh, let's go to the next slide. Uh, I do want to say, and this probably is particularly for a fellow that was raised on a hog farm in a little small community in rural Texas and went to Texas A&M and another land grant college. Communication's tough, especially tough for me. And ecology is, when we talk about ecology, when we use the word ecology, it's basically just simply emphasizing that all is connected and complex. So we have to try to simplify it and order it and sort it out in our little minds. So, the point I'm trying to make in this introduction, and we all know it, is communication is tough. And I kind of struggled right there in communicating that. This presentation is more of just an overview and not really getting into the nitty-gritty of the nuts and bolts. Let's go to the next slide. We want to deal in this presentation a little bit with the why of sustainability. And I actually like to call it positively ethical applied community ecology. Now that's a mouthful, right? Positively ethical applied community ecology. I was on a bus going to an Ogallala Commons meeting when I came up with that great phrase or bunch of words, because of course the first letters spell out peace, and I use it a lot. So we want to understand a little more about the why of peace. Science tells us that peace is important, and we need appropriate values for having a quality of life for all for as long as possible. The whats to me are pretty straightforward. We really know what we need to do, but some folks don't really understand why they need to do it. And the how is the most difficult. How do we get people? How do we get Paul Martin, for instance, a terrible sinner? I was raised Catholic. How do we get Paul Martin to do what needs to be done? He knows what needs to be done. Why didn't he do it? We need, I think, seriously, ecology across a curriculum of all human organizational entities. We need ecology across campuses, across the curriculum of all human organizational entities, and begin to change mindsets and mobilize folks in solidarity. So let's go ahead and go to the questions to the panelists. And we're going to start with Roland Ruiz and focus maybe a little bit on the wonder liquid of quality of life. So Roland, could you tell me a little bit about you're the general manager of the Edwards Aquifer Authority. Tell me a little bit about that and give us a brief overview of what y'all do to protect the quantity and quality of water in this area. So I'll give it over to you.
All right, thank you, Paul. And actually, as I talk a little bit about the Edwards Aquifer Authority, EAA, just as an acronym to shorten that descriptor, we were born as an agency 25 years ago out of a whole lot of conflict, a whole lot of controversy, and some of the stuff that Paul was just talking about. the issue of communication, or the challenge of communication, and the challenge of bringing people together around some very important purpose of life issues, as I would call them, really led to our creation. And so for 25 years, what we've been doing is in three simple words: we've been managing, we've been enhancing, we've been protecting the Edwards Aquifer system. And what does that really mean in real terms? Well, in part, it means regulating use of a natural resource. But more than that, the focus here over my time there has really been on educating, raising awareness and understanding, to where we are now at a position where I think, as we look at what we call our next generation of our mission, it has to be more about inclusive approaches, including more people in the mission. And honestly, we're only now really capable of focusing that way on our work because, as I say, so much of our early time as an agency was getting past the divisive nature of what had previously occurred around this resource, as people staked out their claims and fought over who has rights to what water and whatnot. Fortunately, all those issues have largely been settled, and we can now think more creatively and inclusively about where we're headed. So we manage the resource through a permitting system that the state legislature prescribed for us, and we've been at the center of a lot of litigation over the years as that was challenged and sorted out, to the point where today, for the first time in our history, our litigation docket is clear. There is no lawsuit right now facing us for the first time in 25 years, and that's significant. So as we, for the purpose of this discussion today, I think it is ideal for us to talk about uniting people around our mission, and so as we look ahead, the things that will be different for us, we're making a transition from being just a regulator, but also to becoming more educator, more communicator, and more bridge builder. As we think about the Edwards system, and it's a vast system, we cover, our jurisdictional footprint covers 8 counties, from Uvalde to the west, all the way to Hayes County and a part of Caldwell County to the east, as you look at the South Central Texas map. But even more than that, the natural system is even more far-reaching, because at the top of the system is what we call the contributing zone or drainage area to the system, which stretches up into the Texas Hill Country. That's the catchment area for this underground resource. That's where rainwater collects and makes its way downhill, down gradient, across the recharge zone, and ultimately into the aquifer itself. And of course, water leaves the Edwards through the 2 major spring systems, the Comal and the San Marcos Springs. And those spring systems give life to habitat that where endangered species exist, and which we are obligated to ensure their continued viability by ensuring that there's always continuous minimum spring flows coming from out of this aquifer. And that was the gist of the history of the fight that created us, was how are we going to do just that? How are we going to comply with federal law that says that these species merit protection? And at the time, 30 years ago, no one was doing that. And so here we are, a quarter century later, and we've made great strides. And I say we, when I say we, I talk about the collective we. I talk about the region. I talk about farmers to the west in our region, the urbanized areas of San Antonio and Barrett County, and then the Springs communities to the east, and even downstream along the Guadalupe Basin. All these various stakeholder interests who were very concerned for their own purposes in this resource and ensuring its long-term sustainability. Somehow we managed to bring everybody together and come together and land at solutions where we have achieved great certainty that before probably was not contemplated as actually being realistic. But we've overcome, and we're at a good place now. And so I could go on talking about the work, but that's just kind of giving you a brief thumbnail history of the work, where we've been, where we are, and where we really want to go. So the next generation is all about inclusive, bringing together of people under the umbrella of our mission.
Thanks, Roland. I wish we had several hours to really discuss this, because I know we could, and it really would be great. Hours could pass without any trouble and any real fatigue in listening to you. The words I heard, the key words were initially division and litigation, but I love hearing that the docket is now clear in terms of litigation, and then education and inclusiveness. I'm going to, because I know mi vecino Pete has other things to do, I'm going to go to Pete. I'm going to jump to Pete. Pete, can you tell us a little bit, since Roland focused on education a bit, could you tell us a little bit about Seguin Independent School District's whole child initiatives? And I'll go ahead and say, if you can blend in a little bit of your idea of service learning. I know that's not really exactly in your bailiwick, but in reality it is. And then say a little bit about, if you feel like it, my idea of having ecology across the curriculum. So mostly focus on what you're doing with whole child initiatives in Seguin.
Well, certainly, and thanks again for the invitation, Paul. As Paul mentioned, we are neighbors, and Paul's one of my mentors. I think really highly of Paul and Betsy, and look to them for advice on many things in life. So it's fun to join Paul today. So Seguin ISD is a wonderful community that is, I like to say, it's small enough that we can make some significant change, and it's big enough to have all of the challenges that really present a need for creative thinking and change making. And so that puts us in a really great opportunity. And my title is Director of Whole Child Initiatives. I like to joke around that means that I have no lane and I get in everyone's business. But what it really means is that that I try to advocate for and support wraparound services that create the foundation for keeping kids happy, healthy, safe, and ready to learn and be productive. And so often that looks like initiatives that are set up to try to create opportunities for connection, and often that involves activities that are created for safety and health. And often it's about activities that are really fun in nature, and provide opportunities to build the relationships that we know are vital for the education outcomes that we all desire for our students. When I think about service learning, I think that what that means is that we all need to be thinking about education in a much more holistic way. Sometimes when we think about education, we think about this idea of taking information and absorbing information and then reflecting that information back. But when I think about service learning, I think that means that we need to be thinking about ourselves in a broader context, and thinking and understanding that our actions, or sometimes lack thereof actions, affect everyone and everything around us. And so we're one piece in a much bigger picture. And so I think of service learning as really being kind of a humbling experience of acknowledging that it's about much more than myself. And often in education, that's not at the forefront, because that's not what we assess. And it's definitely not the granular level of data that we look at. And so I think that it's an important reflection to keep in mind as we are building programming, and thinking about how we qualify and quantify our expectations. So, it's not just about adding in a river cleanup day. It's much bigger than that. It's about thinking how we fit into the bigger system. And then I think, Paul, the last question you asked me to think about was ecology across the curriculum. And I think that's very much part of it's the same reason why these wraparound services are so important. When we think about 25 years into the future right now, and think about, let's just say a 10-year-old in our school system, and we think about what we want for that 10-year-old in 25 years, it's not going to be the lesson that is taught on Monday. It's going to be that they live in a safe and sustainable community that's going to be able to provide them opportunity for work, opportunity for health, the outcomes, opportunity for stability, and opportunity for happiness. And so you don't get there by accident. So what that means is that the complexity of every decision that we make, of every resource that we allocate, needs to be thinking that 25 years in the future. And so when I think about that ecology across the curriculum, it's very easy to think how that applies then. And so then it does not become one more thing. It becomes that's the foundation of all of the other granular data that we're trying to put into the school day. So I hope I answered that a little bit. I might have to answer that.
You did great, Pete. And as I look at the screens, and right now, of course, I'll focus on you, but I can guarantee you that I've learned a lot more from you. Yeah, you're a lot younger than me. You're about, almost half my age. But you're a lot younger than me, but I've learned a lot more from you than you learned from me. And as I look at all the screens, that's the case for, there's a couple of y'all that I really don't know that well, but it's a case for all of you. We're going to go on to Rosina now. Rosina also is very interested in education of our youth, ecological education of our youth. And so Rosina, is Rosina still on?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, here I am.
I'm sorry, didn't see you up there in the left-hand corner. But Rosina, could you tell us a little bit about the logic of clean energy for processes of having good food, fiber, and shelter for all humans? And if you could also touch a little bit on global climate change and this is really giving you a full plate, the Paris Agreement and the Green New Deal, but mainly focus on your efforts through Camp Ecologic and your other efforts in your nonprofits.
Of course. Okay. Well, what an amazing panel, first of all. So thank you so much for including me to be a part of this discussion. And I love the framing of your question as the founder of Ecologic. You asked me to talk about the logic of clean energy, so very on brand. And I think, quite simply, clean energy is the logical choice of energy from an environmental perspective, from an economic perspective. And, sometimes there's this framing of energy where it's clean, dirty, good, bad. And I think we do need to think about it with a little bit more nuance. But I think we can probably all agree that, clean energy is what we need to move towards. And when I say clean energy, I mean, there's still discussion about what that entails. And so I won't go into the nitty gritty there, but, solar and wind, we need to quickly transition to those fuel sources and move away from fossil fuel. Now, of course, even within those industries, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of holding those industries to a higher standard when it comes to where are we mining for minerals, how are we recycling panels, things like that. But everything we do, the clothes we wear, the food we eat, the roads we transport on, the platforms we watch movies on, everything runs on energy, and largely the mix is still fossil fuel energy. And in addition to the actual fuel source and the contributing to carbon emissions in the atmosphere, there's also people involved in every part of this supply chain. And so we really need to think about the people involved in these processes, whether it is the food we grow, whether it is the clothes that we wear, and think about, how are we ensuring that not only we're caring for the planet, but for the people on this planet. And so sometimes there is this, just this framing of the climate crisis in terms of the planet rather than understanding the people that are also affected. And so a lot of the work that I try to do is really centering the voices of the people facing kind of the frontline communities of the climate crisis. And even with the clean energy industry. So I am on the leadership team of the Clean Energy Leadership Institute. And, even when we think about the clean energy industry, well, we need to think about, one, who's able to access clean energy resources, what are the job opportunities, who are those available to, and let's really make it an inclusive industry. Let's make sure that these incentives reach all communities that need it. And so those are just some thoughts. And you asked me to also share about the Paris Climate Agreement and the Green New Deal. Well, when we talk about climate change, essentially the more that we emit fossil fuels into the atmosphere, it's like a blanket, right? That's how we can think of our atmosphere. And so we're continuing to thicken our atmosphere. Those heat trapping gases are causing our Earth to warm. And so the Paris Climate Agreement, it is this landmark agreement where every country essentially is agreed to these bold goals of limiting warming to 2 degrees, preferably 1.5 degree based on pre-industrial levels. And so, there is hope there that, every country has agreed to these goals. Now, hopefully we'll reach those goals. I think that's still a little questionable, but the fact that this is this global agreement, and I think by 2024 it is where every country will have to start reporting, and it's going to be this transparent process of how we're doing. Every country has their nationally determined commitment. So, the idea is that every country is working towards this. And then the Green New Deal, it is a framework. And I think what's really worth watching is this infrastructure proposal that's has made some headlines. There are a lot of elements of the Green New Deal in that infrastructure bill, and they go kind of beyond the traditional, what we think of roads, bridges, things like that. All of that is there. There's a big focus on electrifying our transportation fleet, EVs, charging stations, but also buses, federal transportation systems, but then also things like pipelines and getting rid of lead in our pipelines. And so there are a lot of elements of justice embedded into the framework. And so I think all of that is worth really paying attention to. And that's a lot of what the Green New Deal is, where it is looking not only at reducing emissions, but also really with that lens of social justice, as well as with jobs. And so again, I could go on forever. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but really quickly, I just want to focus on the education component as well. And, Paul, you had mentioned something at the beginning about what can individuals do and, what can you as a person do? And I think that's important, but I also think it's really important to have people understand the systems in place and how can we push our elected representatives or corporations to do better and not take on the burden of the climate crisis on our own. Because I think that's a tendency that a lot of us who care about the environmental challenges take on. And have this climate anxiety about the world is burning up and I'm not doing enough because I didn't ride my bike. And while I think it's important that we, do think about those things, I think it's also important that we push our representatives to do better, to make those changes and hold them accountable. And so one of the things that, we do at Ecologic, so last year we did a lot of phone banking with the Environmental Voter Project, really just mobilizing non-voting environmentalists to vote in a nonpartisan way, assuming that if they care enough about the environment and that's their top issue and they're not voting, well, let's give them the information that they need in their election so that they can go out and vote, and hopefully they'll vote for the climate candidate. And then one of the things that we're really focusing on is youth education. And so through Camp Ecologic, really just providing people with information about the climate crisis, but then equipping them with the tools of what they can do, whether it's leveraging social media, whether it is doing that civic engagement, whether it is thinking about food systems. And right now there's just, not enough climate education happening in school. I think present company excluded. It sounds like some of you on this chat are doing a lot at your schools, but by and large, there's just not very much environmental education. A lot of teachers cite that it's too political, or they don't have the knowledge, or their school doesn't even allow it. And so that's really something that we're focusing on, is to educate middle and high schoolers who can understand complex problems and think creatively about solutions. So that is what I'll say for now.
Fantastic, Rosina. I do want to say you are an amazing panel. You really are. And Anita, I'm going to make up time later on, so don't worry about it. We'll make up time and maybe go into the Q&A period. But we're going to get to all the panelists. I'm going to go to Katie and Tom now and deal a little more with agriculture. Katie, could you tell us, what does sustainable agriculture mean to you, and what does it have to do with having a healthy natural economy?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Paul. Really great panel. I feel highly underqualified, I feel like, to be here. So, to me, sustainable agriculture means producing our food, our fuel, and our fiber in a way that avoids, or at least mitigates, the environmental harms that come from conventional agriculture. Some of those may be like soil erosion, water pollution, deforestation, just to name a few. A common understanding of sustainability is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the needs of the future. I think that is a really good goalpost in our society currently, but frankly, in agriculture, I kind of think of sustainability as the bare minimum. I think that terms like agroecology, permaculture, regenerative agriculture better fit my ideology, which is that agriculture can actually improve ecosystem processes through human creativity, ingenuity, through management. And soil health and biodiversity, are big focuses of those movements, because we've turned agriculture away from something that complements nature into industrial processes that destroy it. And I want to really emphasize that those principles and those practices around something like agroecology or regenerative agriculture, those are not new concepts by any means. Those are concepts that have been taught by Native and Indigenous peoples throughout the world for thousands of years. So I think if we want to think about sustainable agriculture, we do have to recognize that and be willing to listen to those communities and what they've brought to the agricultural field over time. I'm not overly familiar with the concept of a natural economy, but I will say that our current policies do incentivize industrial production over sustainable agriculture. I think we need to recognize the true value of food, the value of farmers, and the value of rural communities to shift our economy to something with a long-term view. So as of now, the environmental benefits of producing food, fuel, and fiber sustainably, as well as the detrimental effects of industrial agriculture, are externalities in our economic system. So because those costs and those benefits remain unaccounted for, they have no sway in decision making. I don't know that I have the answer as to how, but I definitely think that those things have to change before we can think about a new economic system.
Great, Katie. I wish I could follow up a little more on some of that, but we're going to move on to Tom. I do want to say, though, I want to make one quick comment that when I was discussing this with Deborah Bolton and said something about financial literacy, because Anita Rehome is involved with that initiative at St. Philip's. And I said, financial literacy is just a subset of ecological literacy. And she jumped right on me. She said, no, financial literacy is ecological literacy. And what she meant by that as an indigenous person, as a Native American, is that, you folks, your ancestors, or a lot of your ancestors, took away, what was really our financial base, the land, the harvest that we could have on that land in terms of a sustainable or natural agriculture, and harvesting, the through hunting and gathering, what was there, and so anyway, I think I'm starting to give my own little presentation and speech here, but let me go ahead and move to Tom. And we're still with agriculture. He's been a lifelong practitioner of agriculture, but I'd like him to say just a little bit about the role of unions, co-ops, and just for the fun of it, agitation committees towards realizing a sustainable ecological community. Tom?
Thank you, Paul. I'm just going to try to dive in the middle of this briefly because I know we got time issues, but I farm, but I've got involved, my degree's in geology, but I've really taken an interest in studying the history of my community, which is turning into maybe the social history as well as anthropology and whatever else. But one thing I learned about my community is how little I knew about my community. A lot of agriculture in this area is relatively new, last 150 years. But what really kind of brought it together and gave it, pulled it together was a lot of the systems of cooperatives. Our Farmers Union organization, which I'm very active in, is a general farm organization. One of the bylines back in like 1905 from state president was, let the words be agitate, organize, educate, and cooperate. And there's a lot to unpack there. But what they would basically do was, by agitation, would be to go out and educate people, fire them up, get them engaged. Then they'd work and they do this in a specific order. And then they would work to organize. And they always said, and the first thing you do is need to organize people's hearts. Then you can educate them, and then ultimately you can cooperate. I grew up on this farm, and my father and mother and actually some neighbors, mentored me a lot, which I think was very powerful. But I keep learning more and more, or realizing how little I did know. But as looking to nature, which farmers, are right in the middle of that if they're paying attention. There are a lot of things some things I didn't look at maybe that was being taught, and I just didn't pick up on, like the idea of survival of the fittest. I think actually relates to how we cooperate, not how we compete. I've always thought that was about competition, the biggest and the strongest. But you don't have to be the biggest and the strongest. You have to be a participant. You have to be part of something larger than yourself. And that says a lot about our communities too, because as they started to try to create themselves and so on and so forth, they really struggled. But what they wanted, they understood that needed to be something, a part of something larger in order to survive. Nature has taught me a lot in my farming, and I'll grant it, I've followed the conventional way in a lot of ways, but if we just sit back and look, nature will teach us what we need to do. It teaches us, how to live. I mean, how we're born. But the one thing that I think it does, and we don't pay attention to, is it's teaching us teaches us how to die. And not in, I don't mean in a morbid sense, but how do you let go of these things in a better way, in a place where someone can pick up and take off with them. I always think about when I read somewhere where when plants die, their roots decay, but those roots, decaying roots, create pathways for the next generation or for future life. So that, I just wanted to mention that about the idea about that. I think nature in itself is more cooperative than it is competitive. And I think that's something I've come to a realization of. Education, we've already talked about a little bit, but I think the other thing is, and our organization always worked hard to promote education, but it has to be the right kind of education. Our typical education, structural education, there's been so many good things, but there's been some weaknesses and some failures. And what happens, I think, with farmers today is that a lot of farmers are getting their education from the wrong place. They're reading publication, they're getting it from corporations or monopolies, and not from each other, not from their neighbors, not from their friends, not from the land that they stand on. The other factor I think that has changed farming and agriculture for me and for most all of us is that we've been able to isolate ourselves very easily. And isolation is really, really dangerous. Isolation keeps us weak. The more we're isolated, the more we're divided. And you know, they promote about being an individual and you did this all by yourself, which is a bunch of bunk. But the idea that that isolation, like I say, makes us really weak. And it makes us think, center on ourselves rather than what we do in relationship to our environment, to nature, and so on and so forth. I mean, the education part, now they got a lot of farmers, and I'm not trying to knock this because, I mean, it's my neighbors and friends, but they think about net per acre, not yield from the land. And there's a lot, when you start talking about net per acre, you start really desensitizing about why you do this, how you do it, and at what cost. I think I'm just going to wrap this up with just a little bit of a quote. I find all these amazing things when I read. I have a microfilm machine. I read newspapers, copious amounts of newspapers from 100 years ago or more. But this was in a civics and citizenship book that was for junior high age back in 1917. It was a quote from a guy by the name of Whitelaw Reid. And he says, "Next to the relations of man with his maker, there is nothing so deserving his best attention as his relation to fellow men. The welfare of the community is always more important than the welfare of the individual or a number of individuals. And the welfare of the community is the highest object of the study of politics." So I'll stop with that. Thanks, Paul.
Well, there's a little song I listen to on Americana radio about there's still some good people, lots of good people in this old world, and Tom is definitely one of them. And he sends me these little newspaper clippings from the late 1800s and early 1900s. Hey, it's today. They're wonderful clippings. I really appreciate getting those regularly. I just want to share with Anita and Jared, just to make them a little more comfortable. I have decided to do just a couple of more slides as far as my part. So, you know, we're gonna pretty much make it on time. We're not really gonna have much of a, you know, question and answer period, if at all, as far as the attendees. But they can put their questions on chat, and I'll take the next week to answer those questions and respond to those comments. So please, those of you out there that's saying, "Man, I want you to address my question," I'll get to it next week, but put it on chat, please. Now, we're going to wrap this part of it with the panelists up in this kind of way. I would like for Professor White, my niece, Sharon A. Bird, and my cousin, John Martin, to say a little bit, each one of you, starting with Professor White, say a little bit about the special role of a historically Black, Hispanic serving community college in the process of socio-ecological justice. So, you know, if you could spend about a minute each, or maybe a little more, but briefly discuss the special role of a historically Black Hispanic serving community college like St. Philip's in the process of socio-ecological justice? And we'll start with Professor White.
So you make me go first, Paul, huh?
There you go.
So I've been at St. Philip's since 1993, so that's a very long time. But what I have enjoyed the entire time I've been there is the diversity of the student population and the joy I see in the students in their achieving their goals. And I have a good relationship with quite a few students that they tell me what they come from and where they're going. And that I feel is part of my job, is to get them there and help them get there. And I think that's a benefit of being in a historically Black and Hispanic serving institution, is that we do get the diverse population, but we have a greater connection with the students, and they have that with each other. So I think that really has an impact on the achieving of those goals. So I have students who have, they come in and they say, well, I'm just going to take this class and then I'm going to, maybe be an LVN. And that student is now a physician, because of the way they were nurtured at a historically Black or Hispanic serving institution like St. Philip's. And I feel very strongly that the role of these institutions in our nation are very important, so that this nurturing can occur and we can push towards social equality for everyone. I'll let someone else.
Thanks, Kathy. Sharon, I guess you were happy, maybe a little sad to hear Roland Ruiz say that his litigation docket was clear, since you're about to take your bar exam. But anyway, would you reflect, Sharon, a little bit on what an entity like St. Philip's College, a wonderful entity, can do as far as helping us move forward in terms of social ecological justice?
Wow, absolutely. First, thank you for the opportunity to be on this panel. It's absolutely been a delight. I think one thing that's very important when we're dealing with education is for students to understand that they have a voice. So if anything, I could say the law provides an opportunity, after it's been like a long-standing question of whether the trees have standing. And so it requires that, environmentalist groups, people that are aware of the issues, are there to speak on behalf of the trees. And I just want to share this quote because I know that you love poetry. Do you remember the book, The Lorax by Dr. Seuss, where he says, let's see, I speak for the trees have no tongues. And I'm asking you, sir, at the top of my lungs, oh, please do not cut down another one. And it's funny, after this Dr. Seuss book came out, it was sort of, it seems like there was a little bit of a connection, because about a year later, that was a big issue, whether the trees have standing, almost like like a trustee, so the idea that, people are able to speak on behalf of natural resources, on behalf of the environment. So I think it's very critical that students are educated enough and inspired by the awareness of the issue, so that they can, understand that they have a voice, and they have the right to take certain issues in before the court of law. So.
Thanks, Sharon. I know you're going to really represent your clients well, and hopefully get in lots of good trouble. John, say just a little bit to kind of finish it off in terms of the role of St. Philip's and other university entities, college and university entities, in terms of.
Thanks again, Dr. Martin. I think the St. Philip's, with our unique designation as both a Hispanic serving institution and a historically Black college, has an opportunity to engage our students around some of the cultural implications of socio-ecological justice issues, excuse me, as well as looking back at the legacy of our ancestors. One of the panelists earlier mentioned about how indigenous people have throughout history had an approach to conservation and using of natural resources and sustainability. And I think that we can look back on those things through those cultural lenses and apply them to a future that embraces that cultural dynamic. And I think as an institution of higher education, we have the opportunity to engage our students and the community in academic discourse to challenge ideas and processes that may be antiquated or outdated or otherwise rooted in old thinking. I think that one of the panelists mentioned that what are we going to do 25 years from now? And I think education institutions have the opportunity to take a position in the present, right, and identify where we can go in the future through innovation, through cultivating those ideas and engaging people in the process of that innovation. And so I think as institutions of higher education, we can create the space for that thinking, for that evaluation, as well as that planning to go forward. So I think that we have a very important role in this conversation.
All right, Anita, we're going to fast forward to a few slides. I will say that this is going to wrap up our panel participation for the most part. If we have a few minutes to do some question and answers, we'll do that. But for the most part, use chat to do that, and I'll address it in this coming week. Let's fast forward a few slides, Anita, please, or to the next one. There we go. Let's stop. Back to that one. The one with the photos. Back to the ones with the photographs. There we go. Let's stop there. I do have $1,000. This is just a 20, but I do have $1,000 that I want to give to a worthy ecological social justice entity, nonprofit. And I would like your ideas. Do it through chat or email me of where you think that $1,000 should go. But I'm just going to tell a little story about the changes in northern Florida and how it affected the family and even the individual of a person that an African American, a wonderful black fellow that really was instrumental in me getting my PhD, who went to Florida A&M but had to drop out because his dad died and he had to take over the little tobacco farm they had. And so I'm thinking about, he's passed away at 59 of various complications in terms of hypertension and diabetes and emphysema. But I want to say a little bit about this area where Andrew Brown grew up and how it changed over the years. If you look up into the left-hand corner of this these photos, when we were in the pre-Columbian period, that area was, primarily longleaf pine community, of what we call in ecology a climax community. But there were indigenous peoples doing agriculture to some extent and hunter-gathering in that area. There were regular burns. They used fires to open it up and to have the type of vegetation and flora and fauna that they wished to have. And of course, there was some harvest from the sea. When the Europeans came in the 1600s and smallpox, guns, germs, and steel did a number, we can call it genocide, on the indigenous people, it turned to wilderness. Then in the latter period of about 1750 to 1860s, whenever Europeans really, Florida became a part of the United States and Europeans became more involved in that area, of course, it was slave labor in cotton, tobacco, and cornfields in that northern Florida area. And then after World War II, as far as the have-nots, the blacks were concerned, it was sharecropping and labor for very poor wages. There were wealthy, mostly whites, that would come in and even do quail hunting from the north. There was railway systems that were into the South by that time, at least closer to 1900. And there was even folks that would recreationally come in to that area of northern Florida, South Georgia, and quail hunt. The quail populations plummeted, and they were having some problems. They learned that controlled burning, there was a research station in Thomasville, Georgia, that in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s found that controlled burning really made the type of ecology that was conducive to quail. And so they began to plant pine trees again, but it wasn't the longleaf pine. It was a poor pine. Loblolly pines would volunteer back, slash pines, sand pines. But that's the longleaf pine is that good lumber that you had in the late 1800s and 1900s. These other pines that we get nowadays, of course, not nearly as dense a wood. They're faster growing, not nearly as good a pine, and not nearly as sustainable in terms of really being a climax community. Then this particular area, and it actually started much earlier, but when I went to that area of Florida, there was a big shade tobacco production. There was much shade tobacco production in that area. They were used for cigar wrappers. Very labor intensive. Blacks were poorly paid. My technician, Andrew Brown, said, when I said, man, we used to get $1 a day pitching watermelons in Devine, Texas. And he said, oh yeah, we used to get 50 cents a day. So what I'm trying to show is, a little bit about the socio-ecological injustices of that particular area. The wealthy in that particular community, and I say North Florida, but the community I was in was Quincy, Florida. During the Depression, Quincy State Bank required folks that borrowed money to buy Coca-Cola stock. So the wealthy became even more wealthy after the Depression because of all that Coca-Cola stock they had. And in fact, Quincy, Florida is known for having more millionaires and maybe nowadays billionaires than any other community in the United States, but it also has tremendous poverty. Despite that wealth, this is the only county with a majority of blacks in Florida. Despite all that wealth, they have twice the poverty rate, and the per capita income is 1/2 of what it is in average in the United States. I will say that's a bad number. Those are bad numbers. But on Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, they're even worse. It points out the disparity we have in the world. One of the major problems in terms of sustainability are positively ethical applied community ecology and social equal justice is all this tremendous disparity in the world. There's a lot of disparity in that particular community. And the last thing I'll say is, of course, they have a tremendous drug problem there. And the economy, if you look at the map of the prisons in Florida, they dot all around that area. There's a prison economy in that particular area. I think I've done about what I can with this, but I'm thinking about sending that $1,000 to the wife of my former technician, Andrew Brown, and asking her, if she can invest it in the education system of Quincy, Florida. And she was a former teacher, and that's where I'm thinking I might send the $1,000. But if y'all have a better idea, I want to hear about it on chat. The last little story I'll tell in that area, and I've overdone it, but I'm not going to go through all the rest of my slides. We're almost through. But I worked for my doctoral dissertation. I worked probably about 10 Black kids that were on a particular program called CETA back in the 1970s. It didn't cost me anything. It was I'll call it a social justice program, but it was a program for youth, and they were paid by the government, another governmental entity, and I used them to sort out my insects. Well, I thought it'd be great to have a big party, you know, after we did had a hard work week, and I said, y'all come on over to the house. We're gonna have a party. You know, we're gonna cook up stuff and drinks. And now Betsy and I, it's the first place we lived after we got married, lived just immediately south of Washington Street, which runs south and west. On the other side of Washington Street, on the north side, were these beautiful mansions from, you know, growing tobacco and Coca-Cola stock. I mean, they were plantation type mansions. On the south side, serious poverty. And they said, no, Paul, we can't go to your house. It's too close to Washington Street. And we Blacks cannot cross Washington Street. That was in 1970. The other thing is Betsy's first teaching job was in the school system there. And it was like 95%, she's saying I'm correct, 95% Black. Where did all the white, it wasn't that, you know, there were say 80% or 70% Blacks in that community, but where did all the whites go? With integration, there was white flight to these so-called Christian schools. So anyway, it's just a story of socio-ecological injustice, and that's where I think I might send the $1,000. We're going to have to cut it there because we've already run over time. I do want to read a few stanzas from a poem. A wonderful woman named Sylvia Manning has gotten me involved in poetry here in Seguin. So I'm going to go ahead and read this poem. She said, make up a poem that would, you know, go to the tune of a song. So here it is. Rolling in sweet earth's arms. And I'll try to sing it. I'm sorry, but I'm going to try to sing it. I wish I was rolling in sweet earth's arms. Just a rolling in sweet earth's arms. Got to get off my back, ain't enough good railroad track. I'm rolling in sweet earth's arms. Well, beautiful, spacious skies. Well, beautiful, spacious skies. They were there for the natives and the bear. Beautiful, spacious skies. I was supposed to be doing the bass. Doom, 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 doom. You think that this is your land, but once, believe me, 'twas mine. You pushed my nation to the reservation. You stole all this land, such a crime. I don't want amber waves of grain. No, not those amber waves of grain. They're imported, you see, killed many a tree. These damn amber waves of grain. Artificial can be a terrible menace. In agreement with me is old Dennis. Cars, big homes should be banned. Do more with your legs and hands. Artificial can be a terrible menace. Living within our means and living within our means. That does not mean brand spanking new jeans. Living within our means. Well, you ask what's the cautionary principle? Well, this is the best I can do. Critically think, are you thick as two short planks? That's the cautionary rule. Social justice is the most important. Must all heed the golden rule, but ecological sanity is also good for humanity. Holistically, heed the golden rule. Winning without any ethics. This is sort of about, you know, some recent times. Winning without any ethics. Lying and brainwashing too. They really piss me off. Want to dump them in a pig trough. winning without any ethics. The only thing of worth you see. LBJ said it to both you and me. Teach, preach, politician is what you gotta be. The only thing of worth you see. Natural resources drawn down and overshot. It really makes me hot. Nevertheless, there's one thing that is worse. Disparity is such a dreadful curse. We've all got to share with all others. Leave some for the poor and forlorn, for the Palestinians over there, for all the birds, butterflies and hair. Leave some for the poor and forlorn. No, I really don't care what you think about me. I don't really give a darn. Got to try for peace. Our lives are own but lease. Yeah, I really don't give a darn. Well, I wish I was rolling in sweet Earth's arms. Just a rolling in sweet Earth's arms. Got to get off my back. Ain't enough good railroad track. Rolling in sweet Earth's arms. And now y'all see why I didn't try for a career in singing. And I am going to read one other little phrase by Wendell Berry. And he says, I've got it all. I do have a little book that should be coming out fairly soon. Games We Play. Let me read the title. More than 200,000 years of living truthfully and 5,000 of searching for truth. And this is Wendell's little phrase that I have all through this book. To live, we must break the body and shed the blood of creation. When we do this knowingly, lovingly, skillfully, reverently, it's a sacrament. When we do it ignorantly, greedily, clumsily, destructively, it's a desecration. In such desecration, we condemn ourselves to spiritual and moral loneliness and others to want. And I really sincerely very much appreciate all you panelists and all you other folks that joined us today. For me, it was wonderful. I hope it was for y'all also, and all of the attendees out there. And I do see some old friends there. Bob Turner is an old entomologist friend that's trying to get my attention. Laura Salazar, that actually she did this front cover here on this book. And there's a number of her other illustrations throughout the book. And also here's one from my wife, Betsy. But anyway, Sharon A. Bird, Diane Dusterhoff, I hope I pronounced her name right, who is so active in the San Antonio area and does so much. Let's see, who else do I see on the screen? Ana Maria Gonzalez, who encouraged me to do this book. She kept hanging with me on this. It actually took, y'all might read it and say, man, that wasn't that much, but it took me about 4 years to, I say me, it wasn't me. I titled it, I said that it was by and far all biota. It wasn't me, it was myself, my wife, Laura, and her daughter had some inputs into it. That was primarily it.
Marvel.
And I have to, Tim Barr, Marvel Maddox. Oh, Marvel's on there, but he doesn't have a photo of himself. But Marvel Maddox, he's my hero. A lot of y'all are, there he is. A lot of y'all are my heroes. But Marvel really helped me in terms of doing some stuff in this community of Seguin, Texas. We used to have a little, very informal, and I guess it's sort of still in existence, organization that we call Siempre Sustainable Network. So thank all of y'all. Let's give each other a big hand, and thank y'all for kind of carrying me.
Happy Earth Day.